Well, you're going to have to excuse my poor Greek. We're going to shift the program to English for a few minutes. But I'd like to say good morning and let you know what a pleasure it is to be here, speaking about a topic that I feel very passionate about, which is clinical trials as a potential growth engine for the Greek economy. I feel that way because I think it's one of those spaces in the industry where all of our interests overlap. It's good for pharmaceuticals, it's good for patients, it's good for the economy, and it's certainly good for the clinical community. And I think it takes on even greater importance when we start to consider the significant task that we have in front of us to return this country to growth. And it is within that context that I would argue that this initiative, pharmaceuticals and investment in clinical trials, has to be a key ingredient for any long-term growth plan for this country. So with that in mind, I'd like to touch on a couple topics today. Number one, I'd like to talk a little bit about the value of innovation. Secondly, I'd like to discuss the value that clinical trials bring and what it requires to get them. And then finally, to have an honest discussion about where we stand as a country and what we're going to need to do in order to really bring that investment to Greece. Let me begin by way of a bit of an introduction. As was mentioned, I'm not only the general manager of Pfizer, but I'm also the president of the Pharma Innovative Forum. It is an association of 20 leading research-based pharmaceutical companies. You will recognize many of the names on that slide. What may not be as obvious is that these are companies, many of which have deep roots in this community, some of which last more than 50 years, and they are critical contributors both to the economic and the physical health of this country. What may also not be as obvious is the willingness of this group to really be good and committed corporate citizens, to ensure almost exclusively at our own expense that this country continues to have and its patients continue to have supply to medicines during this very difficult time of economic depression. Now, our goal is really centered on bringing innovation to people to help them improve their lives. And the more that we do that, then the better off they are. So it's in my opinion, a good investment for any country to spend on innovation. Why is that? Well, first, it helps to improve health, as we would expect. And it meets the highest of criteria in the sense that it can extend lives. And we know that from the Lichtenberg data here in Greece, where we were able to extend lives by almost a year over a 15-year time period. But it's not just the length of life, it's also the quality of life. Rheumatoid arthritis would be a good example of that, where with the introduction of the anti-TNF biologics over a decade ago, since their inception, we've been able to reduce the level of disability, which is significant, associated with RA by more than half. So bottom line is, these medicines work. Now, the question then becomes, well, do we get value for money? Is it worth the investment that we make? And the short answer to that, proven consistently across studies, is yes, that we do. There is an acquisition cost, but that acquisition cost is regularly exceeded by the system savings. The statins, which is the example that I have on the slide here on the right, would be a good example of that, where the introduction of the statins in the mid to late 90s had a cost, $24 per capita, but that cost was dwarfed by the system savings, which was more than triple that. Vaccines would be another good example. For every dollar that we spend on vaccines, we save $10 in the healthcare system. So innovation is a good investment for our health system, but it goes beyond that. there is an inextricable link between health and wealth. And essentially, the way it works is the better our health, the more wealth we generate, because the healthier your workforce, the more productive it is, and then the higher output that you get from that. And as we explore the link between health and wealth, one of the most obvious expressions or contributions that we as an industry make to the Greek economy is through employment, which is significant both in its size and in its quality. So in terms of size, both indirectly and directly, we employ over 87,000 people. In terms of quality, these are the very high, many of these are the very high-skilled jobs that we are trying to keep in this country, right? It is the drain that we are trying to protect against. To put that in perspective, the pharmaceutical industry generates 80% more value per employee than any other industry. This is high premium fuel for our economy. And so not surprisingly, as an industry, we make a significant contribution to the economy to the tune of about 3.5% of GDP, over 6 billion euros. So that brings us to where we sit today and the discussion around clinical trials. But first we have to look at how we're doing in terms of attracting foreign direct investment into Greece. We're not going to grow without it. Now, if you look at the data on the left, that's from OECD, and it ranks the level of foreign investment by country. The simple way to read this is the farther right you are, the better. The further left you are, the worse off you are. Unfortunately for Greece, we can't be much farther left on this chart. Okay, so if you want to look at it positively, we have room for growth. If you look to the right, this is data from the Bank of Greece. And there are essentially two plots of data, two data points over a 10-year time period. The first one is total inflows of investment into Greece. That's the darker bar there. Okay, and what you see is a pretty clear downward trend. If you just look at the last two bars, 14 to 15, that's a 73% decrease in investments coming into Greece. If you look at the lighter red line, that is net inflows. And what that shows is not only are we not getting a lot of investment, but we're losing more than we get. So we're actually seeing divestment from Greece to bring us to a point, a 10-year low over this horizon. If you were to look at benchmarks, we should get about a little less than 5% of our GDP in foreign investment. And we're not getting that. In fact, there's about 5 billion missing if we use that as a benchmark. So clearly, there is a need. And clinical trials offers one, I would argue, valuable and significant opportunity. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, as many of you know, is an R&D intensive industry. In fact, it is the most intensive industry. And we devote about more than 14% of our sales on average to funding innovation, to funding clinical trials. To put that in perspective, in Europe, that's about 30 billion euros worth of investment in 2014. The chart on the right-hand side of the slide shows you where that investment goes by country. And again, we read this the same way as the chart on the prior slide. The further right you are, the better. The further left you are, the worse off you are. Unfortunately, Greece's position hasn't changed very much. If we compare ourselves to some countries of similar size and in some cases economic history, we can begin to see how big that disparity is. So if we look at Greece, which has less than 100 million worth of investment, and compare that to Belgium, which has about 2.5, or even Ireland, which has 300 million, you can see there's a difference. Even Cyprus, which has 1/10 of our population, attracts more clinical trial investment than we have in Greece. So if you just looked at, whether we got our fair share based on population, sort of a crude measure, but helpful nonetheless, we should get about 400 million euros more than we are getting now. Now, as many of you know, there's a lot that comes with clinical trial investment. It is a very valuable asset for a country. Now, the state benefits because the money that they bring in funds jobs. So for each 100 million we get in, so if we double our clinical trial investment, a very realistic goal, not that hard to do if we have the right circumstances, then we're going to generate 4,000 new jobs and will more than double the value that we bring in terms of GDP return. For the physician community, which I know we have a lot here for, it means that you continue to get to polish your reputation, to elevate the stature of the medical community here in Greece. You get much needed resources to do the work that you're capable of doing, and you enhance your own skill and knowledge base. And obviously for patients, the value is they get access to the latest medications. So I think we can all agree there's a lot of good here related to clinical trial investment. So what does it take to get clinical trials? If I were to simplify it in my basic math, in addition to some infrastructure, you need to have trials, you need to have a good cost basis, right? So they need to be relatively cheap. You need to be able to do them relatively quickly. You need to do them at a reasonable quality, and there's got to be an incentive. Once you meet all those criteria, there's got to be an incentive that is competitive with other incentives. So where do we stack up? And again, I use Belgium and Ireland just as a point of comparison. So on an infrastructure basis, we're pretty good, right? We have good clinical skill here. We have skilled labor. We have the patient populations. When you start to get into some of the other clinical parameters, we're pretty good on quality. Our cost is okay. Could be slightly better, but not bad. Where we really lack behind, though, is in timing. Right? We are much slower than the rest of Europe. We're about 3 times as slow as the European average, 6 times as slow as the best in Europe in getting these trials done. But that's a fixable problem. That's something that we could work on together to fix. Where there's a big gap is on incentives. And I'll talk a little bit about Greece more in a second. But in essence, what countries like Belgium and Ireland have done is they've prioritized healthcare as a critical driver for economic growth in their country. So they actively plan to ensure that they get these investments. They make a pharmaceutical-friendly environment where investments can come. They give appropriate rewards, not just for the clinical trials, but also for the products that come out of those clinical trials. And they have an ongoing discussion about how to do this. In contrast, what we look at with Greece as an investor is much less friendly. So as an investor, I have to first realize that I'm putting money into a country, into a market that has essentially been cut in half, the value of that market over the last 6 to 7 years. I also have to be comfortable with the fact that I am getting amongst the lowest prices in Europe, and because of the high cost of generics in this country, there's not a lot of room for innovation. And I've got to be comfortable paying a heavy tax of doing business here, a tax that will cost the industry over $1 billion this year. So that means that 1 out of every free medicines in this country is free. It's on the industry. And that is not a sustainable position. Essentially, we are paying for failure. We are paying for the failure of the government to put in place the necessary reforms to have a well-functioning healthcare system. So I have to be comfortable with that as an investor. And unfortunately, I have to say that things are not getting better. They're only turning towards the worst, and it concerns me a great deal. And unfortunately, it dims some of my optimism. There are new measures that are afoot, and I typically wouldn't talk about these in public, but they are on public record now. And given the gravity and significance of the consequences of these measures, not just on the industry, but now we've crossed the line where these measures are going to affect patients, they're going to affect the medical community, and they're going to affect our investment in the economy of this country. So I feel compelled to discuss them. Specifically, there are two new measures on new products that are going to be very impactful. The first one is the reimbursement criteria. How many countries need to be reimbursed before they can come to Greece, and how many HTAs have to assess it. Essentially what that's going to do is it's going to double to triple the time for a new product to get into this country. So that means we're going to wait much longer to get new products. And we're going to put a significant tax on top of those. A confidential 25% flat rebate. I'm not sure how you keep that confidential. So you also bring into place reference pricing problems, right? And that's on top of the rebates and clawbacks that we already pay. So for the low prices that we get, we're now going to discount them 50 to 60%, which is going to make it very prohibitive for any company to bring a new product into this country. So at best, they're going to come late, and at worst, they're not going to come at all. Now, on top of that, when it comes to clinical reform, when it comes to system reform, structural reforms that the MOU calls for, we have no progress. Nothing's being done. So we're not going to have room for innovation. We're not going to do the right things so that we use whatever innovation we have with the right patients at the right time. We're not going to do anything to curb our prescribing habits, which haven't changed in the last 7 years. The rate is almost exactly the same as it was before. And on top of it, we're going to slow down generic erosion, creating even less room in the system. So what does that mean? Well, as I said, I think for patients it means they're going to get products, new products later, or maybe not at all. And make no doubt about it, we are on the verge of the next great wave of innovation. But I am concerned that wave may not make it to the shores of Greece, or if it does, it's going to come real late. It means that as clinicians, you're not going to have access to these medicines, and over time, you're going to fall behind the knowledge base and experience base of your colleagues in other countries. And unfortunately, it means that it's going to be real darn hard for any company to bring investments into this country when you know that the innovation you're investing to create is not valued or respected. These are not theoretical risks. We need only look to other countries. One close to home, Cyprus, gives us some insight. In Cyprus, a 8.5% rebate was put in place on new products. None of the reimbursement criteria that I talked about. And in 2 years, 20 new products didn't come into that country, several of which were for serious illnesses. And after that, the rebate was repealed so that new products could come back in. Look at Eastern Europe. Many countries in Eastern Europe don't have medicines that we would consider common here because of the reimbursement practices that they have and their practices towards innovation. So as we head into this conference, I think it raises some bigger questions that we need to answer. What are we going to do to attract innovation in this country? It's clear that we have a need to do it, and it's clear that we are lagging behind. I think it also raises a broader philosophical question about what kind of healthcare system do we want for ourselves and for our families? Are we willing to put in place a second-class healthcare system where we get products late or not at all, and we accept the health consequences that go with that. You know, this country has, and the people of this country have given up a lot. They've given up money, salary, jobs, and things that they care about. Are we really ready to give up our health? Because that is part of the question that we are being asked here by these new measures. And I don't mean to over-dramatize this, but I really feel it is my responsibility to point out when we are going over a line that is going to take us in a very, very different direction. And it has real implications for the direction of foreign direct investment as well. So what do we do about that? Having laid out my case here, what do we do? What are our options? Well, first I would suggest that we can't move forward with measures that are going to overtly penalize innovation or limit foreign direct investment. We can't have one side of the government saying they want foreign direct investment and the other side saying we're not going to really value what it produces. We need a transparent pricing and reimbursement system that can adequately judge and value innovation, right? We're not going to pay for all innovation, but we're going to pay a reasonable rate for good innovation. And we need room in the system to pay for that. We need a pharma budget that is, you know, approaching what actual demand is. And we need to put in place appropriate incentives, which can be tax incentives, which are clear and easy to access, as well as allowing companies to take their clinical trial investments and offset it against things like the clawback. We need to work collaboratively to enhance our competitiveness, especially on things like our time to get clinical trials approved and completed. And we need to form a partnership. No one group is going to do this alone. It's going to take a collection of stakeholders to decide that this is a priority, and it's something that we want to do, and it's something that we want to actively plan for and continue to evolve as a collective. And I sincerely hope that that is the approach that we take. So let me bring my comments to a close there. I want to thank you for this opportunity and for your attention, and I wish you much success in the conference. Thank you.